Hello and welcome. The days and nights pass by as time marches relentlessly on. How well are we spending our time? Is a phrase and an expression and an encouragement the Buddha gave to his Sangha to reflect upon on each Uposatha. But whenever given the occasion to reflect on how well we've been spending our time, it is opportune to do so. And I too occasionally reflect upon how well I've been spending my time. We get caught in mundane matters, or what can be seen as mundane matters of routine, the daily grind, the rat race, the careers, even our social activities and family lives can become, by the nature of routine, monotonous, repetitive. And there are occasions we can feel less than enthusiastic about Monday morning, or about that visit to the family member whom you feel you should see, maybe out of a little bit of duty rather than real longing for their company. Getting caught, getting stuck in a rut is the expression often used. And when we try and picture that, visualize being stuck in a rut, thinking of a ploughing a field, creating a rut of earth, and being stuck in that direction, going one way, and being very much unable to see what is either side, what is surrounding us, what is all around. Focused on maybe a career or a goal in family life or our social environment, something we're trying to achieve, and missing all that's going on surrounding us. This is quite normal. We also take a great deal of security and comfort in knowing what might happen next. We cannot be sure, but when we're in that rut, when we know every Monday we have certain duties, and Tuesday we have other things to do, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and so on, this routine, this calendar of mundane daily life gives us some sense of security, reassurance, comfort, and a sense of well-being in itself. Very much this is why we have fond memories of the past. People often say, well, when I think back to so-and-so a time, or this day and age, or when I was doing this and when I was doing that, the world didn't seem so bad. We can even look back ourselves, or find ourselves, our minds, glancing back to the near past for a sense of comfort sometimes, without even knowing we're doing that. Maybe we've arrived at a destination, and I know I've done this myself, not so much recently, but in years gone by. I've arrived at a destination in a country where I'm going to, and there's been a lot of uncertainty. It's been the environment has been very alien to me, as I have been the alien within that environment. And I've found my own thoughts wandering back to the airport lounge and the conversation I had with a fellow traveller or someone I just met in passing in the airport, or even sitting next to on the plane, and thought, oh, that was a nice day, wasn't it, I had then? And that comfort, that security comes from knowing that story, knowing what happens next. The narrative is there. in the even near past, because you witnessed the results of what happens next. Whereas the present moment, here and now, the time we find ourselves in, is, of course, so uncertain. We do not know what happens next. And then we find ourselves thinking, well, back to yesterday. Well, wasn't it nice sitting having my meal yesterday morning? Or wasn't it nice on Arms Round, even though it was raining? Because you have the end to that day's story. And this is often what gives us momentum and adherence or attachment to the past, whether it's the near past or the distant past of our lives. Memorable times, all of those beautiful summers, of course, that we had as children. And if you're from my part of the world, the white Christmases, the snowy trees and beautiful white fields. I'm not so sure there are many more of those beautiful summers or white Christmases back then than there are now. But we certainly remember those as a way of reassuring ourselves in the present moment, in the security of our past. But of course it is just a memory. We could look at a photograph and think that's nice. It's just a piece of paper with an image representing a memory or provoking a memory. Colours, it's just the eyes seeing, light. The experience of seeing, recollection, transferring that into memories, sankhara, forming mental formations of that was a nice occasion. We don't often dwell back thinking, oh, this was a terrible time I had then. But even so, even some not so pleasant events in our lives, when thought of, can give us in the present moment, if we're uncertain, we're uncomfortable, we're worried, frightened, anxious, can give us some sense of security. Well, wasn't it all very nice that time when I was having to stay in hospital when I had my appendix removed? Might wander through your mind, where the meals came out at the right time. I always had some food. The bed was relatively comfortable. I was warm and dry. I was looked after so well by the very kind and nice nurses and doctors. Well, of course, it was a terrible event. You were in hospital. But if you're having a very uncomfortable day and nothing's going your way, even that can bring back fond feelings, fond recollections, all coming around through nama, through sanya, perception, and vedana, mental emotions, or even physical feelings, and these sankhara, mental formations. This is not consciousness, not vijnana of the present moment. This is recollection, this is memories of something that happened in the past. Cannot be changed, but gives us a comfort blanket, something to lean upon. But it is of no use. So we take refuge in, and I stress this, we take refuge. We find security, we find that comfort blanket, we find that something to lean on in what's known as the triple gem, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. The Buddha, our teacher, the Dharma, his teachings, and the Sangha, the body of monks and nuns whom propagate those teachings and have done so for millennia in the lineage of the Buddha's original disciples to this day, unchanged largely since they were first transmitted and written down a few hundred years after the Buddha's time, but very well refined and in the original body of texts in the Pali Canon. These teachings are there to take great comfort in, find great support in, and are not, although they're coming from the past, are not just a faint and insubstantial memory, picture, recollection of a past events, but an actual instruction, a method, a teaching that we can put into practice and use in the present moment, here and now, to no longer need that support of the past to lean on. To no longer need to think, oh, well, wasn't it much better then? Last year's holiday was so much better than this holiday. Because you don't know what's happening next, whereas you can remember last year's holiday from the beginning to the end. Of course, this year's holiday will become next year's last year's holiday, if you're fortunate enough to have such things. But always, whatever the example, we tend to take that security in the past. But when you can take refuge, find that security, that protection in the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, this triple gem, you find very quickly that that is your true refuge, and that memories of the past become just that, insubstantial recollection and often inaccurate representations of something that's happened before that may not happen again and is irrelevant to this present moment here and now, other than what you may have learned through experience in that time, but bringing it forward into this present moment here and now. Similarly, we cannot determine, we cannot know what will happen next. We cannot even know what our next thought will be, let alone how our physical bodies may behave or indeed not behave. These are aspects of our physical body and thinking brain that we cannot know other than what we're experiencing in the present moment and how we're using those in the present moment. So this is why we take great care and effort to concentrate and focus our minds on now, and with all of our actions of body, speech and mind, and with all of our available resources that we have, in the case of bhikkhus, in the case of bhikkhunis, that is Buddhist monks and Buddhist nuns, we have the available resources of the support, lay practitioners in Buddhism, whether within our society locally, villagers or townspeople, neighbours, or whether in distant countries via online, but encouragement and support that we have from people working, living and experiencing worldly life, even though we're not doing that, but through our interaction and necessary interaction, because of that dependence on them, are able to keep in touch, not run away from worldly life, but keep in touch and offer that refuge as the third aspect of the triple gem, the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. The Sangha, us monks and nuns, communities, are here for your support by way of giving the Dharma. Giving the Dharma as something to not only take comfort from in listening to, the very act of listening to the Dharma can be very comforting and reassuring, but to learn and pick up tips to manage our existence in worldly life with careers, families, social activities, and so on. This is the beautiful interdependence that remains to this day. The Buddha started 2,568 years ago when first forming the Sangha, but knowing that not all people are to become monks and nuns. In fact, the minority will be monks and nuns, and as long as they're living on very little by way of support, they will be supported by the majority of lay practitioners whom are interested in maintaining that aspect of their refuge, the triple gem, to be there for their support and comfort and something to lean on in the present moment and into the future. Far more substantial, far more real, far more useful than what we see by just looking back to those nice sunny summers or white Christmases of the past. And what the Dharma gives to the lay practitioner is that ability to see clearly what we come to see clearly as full-time practitioners in this monastic life. So I remember when I was in my former life, within this lifetime, with a young family, a long time ago now, my youngest child of that family is approaching 30, so this is some years ago now, on holidays in a very beautiful part of the world in southern England called Devon. Beautiful coastline, very beautiful countryside all around. And this is long before, or quite a bit before, we had drones, before we had Google Earth, and all of these ways that one can see from above, see the ground from above. Then you could only see what was to your right, to your left, ahead, and if you turned around, behind you. And driving along through this very beautiful part of the world, I remember the children getting very impatient, and at the time I think my wife and also myself, with endlessly driving for miles and miles and miles with just hedgerows either side that are quite high. They keep, I think, to protect the fields, the hedgerows dividing the fields high to stop the wind creating damage, I suppose, or whatever. But you drive down these kind of ruts, these valleys. Now, of course, you know where you've left and you know where you're going. But in the journey, there's very little to see. You're in the most beautiful countryside, but all you see is green, green, and not many trees and fields, just solid green either side, and a bit of light ahead of you and a bit of light behind you. And you have to trust your instincts, because this was before sat-navs also, and your map reading skills, or your partner's map reading skills, to hope that this road would get you to where you wanted to go. There weren't many facilities for passing an oncoming vehicle, a little bay, but you certainly couldn't make a U-turn. You had to wait until the end of this lane. And that reminds me very much as to how people go through life in worldly existence. And also, it has to be said, many times as monastics, in monastic life. In a scenario such as that, where they're in a rut, travelling from A to B, birth and death, and just getting along as best they can, and unable to see what's really happening clearly. And you've heard this word vipassana, which actually isn't specifically a method of meditation, but the results of insight meditation, and means to see clearly. So when you have taken refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma and the Sangha, and you're driving along with your family along one of these very narrow lanes with nothing to see, it is like having suddenly the ability to rise above those hedgerows and see all around clearly the beauty of this existence. Often it is said that Buddhism can seem so pessimistic. We talk of suffering, and yes, okay, the end of suffering, but the long and hard path we have to be determined to use energy to strive along to get to the end of suffering through many lifetimes. Well, this is a very bleak view. In fact, when you can see that all we have in reality is the present moment here and now, that is like your Google Earth or your drone taking you up into the beautiful blue skies and being able to see all around. And how do we do that? We just take refuge in not belief, not rites and rituals, not worship or prayer, but take support and comfort that is offered by our teacher, the Buddha, through his teachings, the Dharma, by means of the Sangha that is there to support you, the likes of myself and other monks and nuns whom are here to share with you the Dharma, keep propagating the Dharma. Not giving sermons, not giving soapbox talks to convert the masses, but when you come to us asking these valuable questions and comments that you do, we can discuss with you how that relates to the teachings of the Buddha, and the Sangha can suggest to you ways of putting that into practice in your lives. So many people have hobbies or other interests outside of their careers, their work environment, and even their family lives, homes, as well as social lives. Maybe they like to go, I can't think of any hobbies particularly. So I'm sure you can think of some. Let's say drone flying is that a hobby? I have a bit of an adversity towards drones, and I'll tell you why. When I was living on a beach for 3 years in my van, it was a beautiful beach, very amazing scenery, sunrises and sunsets, which is unusual on a coastline, but the land was so flat you could appreciate both the sun rising every day and the sun setting over the sea every day. But it was very often disturbed by, this was in 2017, when drones were quite I suppose an exciting thing. I don't know whether it would be worse or less now, but anyway, these things would suddenly appear, like a bird really, but making a buzzing noise, and just be hovering around where I was staying in my van, and seemingly looking at you like some alien from out of space. And I suppose I did develop a little aversion to such things, thinking, well, you know, isn't this surely an invasion of people's privacy, that these things can just go around wherever they like, zooming in and looking? And maybe they are, maybe they're not. But nevertheless, they're a very good representation of being able to see all around what you've never been able to see before. And also very valuable for people whom are watching the results of those drones' activities to use that material to see very clearly what they've never been able to see before. And exposure to the Dharma for the first time can feel like this. Suddenly you see clearly and very naturally and easily the nature of impermanence. Anicca, we call it in Pali. We see suffering, but we see what's causing the suffering. We are causing our own suffering through trying to satisfy insatiable desires, bringing about additional suffering, always trying to get one better and improve upon what we already have. Or remembering back to the past, something that's gone, something that may never happen again, and leaning on that, rather than taking into account what we have here and now and what can be so very much enjoyed in the present moment. This is opening it all up so clearly, and we can experience also for ourselves, when seeing clearly like this, the nature of how all this is out of our control. As not being able to know what we'll be thinking next, how our emotions will be, and what will happen next externally and internally within our own physical bodies. None of this can be known, but we can determine that path to a degree by our own actions of body, speech and mind in the moment we have, which is now. This is why we determine to take the 5 precepts. So you will hear this expression maybe in Buddhist circles, or maybe you haven't, Tisarana Panchasila. Tisarana means taking refuge in the triple gem, as I've just explained. Taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma and the Sangha. And Panchasila means the 5 precepts. So we take refuge in the triple gem and determine by taking the precepts to refrain from killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying or taking of intoxicants. And this is the foundation of our practice for meditation, samadhi, and the development of wisdom. And that, sila, samadhi, meditation, and panya, wisdom, is the whole of the Noble Eightfold Path, summed up, that the Buddha showed us and teaches us in all of these teachings to follow in order to become free from that suffering in this lifetime. So it is such a cheery teaching, philosophy, or religion, if you think of it as such, without belief, without the necessity of rites, rituals, prayer, or worship, but just to open your eyes and see clearly that, wow, we can be in charge of our own destiny. We don't have to think of yesterday. We can make tomorrow just as pleasant, just as enjoyable, if we're fortunate enough to experience it, by our actions now, by being kind to others, generosity, by being truthful to others and to ourselves, by diligently practicing, when we have the opportunity, just the physical aspect of meditation, sitting still and allowing ourselves to do nothing. So as I began this talk, I asked, how well have we been spending our time? And I can look around and I can think, well, I've now been here, I think, 18 months or so, but in this particular location, this building even, this room, for now a year, if not a little more, I'm not sure exactly. And what have I done? Well, if we stay within that rut, if I stay within my vehicle down that narrow country lane and don't see clearly externally what I may have come to realize, may have come to see through my own practice, then, well, I've done very little. I've acquired a new fan. That's about the sum total. Which you've kindly, through your support, enabled me to do, and it's going to be very useful come the hot season. At the moment it's not on because it's a bit too much, too powerful when making these video talks, but we'll see about that later on. But other than that, my routine, I've gone to bed, gone to sleep. I don't have a bed, I sleep on the floor, but gone to sleep. I wake up in the morning at about 3 and I sit and I do nothing. Well, I meditate, yes, until 6, when we have chanting, the live chanting, yes, on YouTube, which I share with you, which is so encouraging to do. So a few more people each and every day, that number grows, that join me in that activity, 6 a.m, this Sri Lanka time, and then at 6:30 I go on Pindapata or alms round to collect food, walking through the village into the nearby town, collect my food, returning here by about 8 o'clock to eat my meal. After I've shared the surplus out, which is quite a surplus, but by about 8:30 sit and eat my meal, and 9 o'clock clean that up. And then after maybe a cup of coffee and running through your comments and emails, sitting down to talk to you now, as I'm doing, like this. And then I'm free to practice some walking meditation if necessary, not usually at that time of day because I've already walked a large distance on arms round, but practice sitting meditation for most of the rest of the day. This activity, I'm able to meditate for 6 to 9 hours minimum each and every day because there are no other responsibilities for me to do. As you've seen, I don't even have much sweeping, just my little, whatever you'd call this out here, veranda, because there's people around, they like to sweep and keep the surrounding environment all beautiful and tidy and clean. And I think, how well have I been spending my time? Well, I've been doing nothing. But what I've been doing is practicing full-time, without a career, without family responsibilities or a social life. I don't even have a telephone to speak to people on. Well, I have these phones, but no means on them to, or anyone for that matter, to phone to speak to, except on the very rare occasions when I might speak to, as is coming up, my mother on her birthday or on Christmas Day or something like that back in the UK, when I use an app or something to do that. But this isn't part of my life. It's just meditation. And you can think, well, surely isn't that in a rut? You just meditate and do nothing else. What are you doing? Well, I'm realizing, I'm coming to see so much more clearly how in every detail the Dharma works, not only in my own existence, but in all of the people that I interact with, am dependent on a daily basis, however short that time is. So my interaction on arms round with people is very brief indeed. They put something in my phone bowl, I quickly chant something, and I walk on to the next. There's 30 to 40 people offering food on about a walk of 1 hour, 40 to 50 minutes maybe. So there's not any conversation, but the interaction is very wholesome. They are taking refuge by that generosity that they're offering food for another day to keep me going within my practice, supporting me, because that's after all I need, over and above shelter, which is offered to me, these robes, clothing, which is offered to me, and if necessary, medicine, which is available to me if required. That food is what keeps me going from day to day. Their generosity helps them, but that interaction is them also taking refuge in the Sangha, whom are living by way of example, the full-time life of Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, how to come to see clearly the characteristics of existence, to begin to eradicate the hindrances in our lives, in our practice of meditation, coming from the kilesas, or our defilements, our natural human ways that are greed, being greedy, hatred, just not liking things or people or situations, and delusion. Not ignorance, not having a lack of technical knowledge or information, but delusion, however technically able you are, however intellectually knowledgeable you are, you can still be very deluded. Delusion is just not understanding. So I haven't been sitting here for over a year learning suttas off by heart or translating anything. I haven't been giving anything by way of Dharma talks apart from occasional visitors here, which I welcome and enjoy very much, but then my interaction with you in this format, on this platform. But this is only the time the video you see is, say, an hour. That's the only time it takes. There's no editing, there's no pre-planning, there's no subsequent work to do other than to press send or upload whatever it says, and it's on YouTube for the whenever scheduled time might be. Other than that, I've just been practicing. And this practicing, what is that? What are you talking about when you say practicing? It's not a physical exercise, a yogic technique particularly, but it is a conditioning, a training of the mind. And it is the development of wholesome mind states and the eradication of unwholesome mind states that are the basis or the formation of, or are obscuring the ability to see clearly how thoughts arise, emotions arise, how feelings come about as a result of those thoughts or emotions, and how we recollect and how we then make mental formations, judgments, or form attachments to things we feel we like, or things we feel we want more of, or things we don't like, and things we don't want, or things we want less of. All of this becomes so much clearer when you're dedicating your time 100% to this practice. And I can now, in hindsight, after a year or so living alone with no social interaction to speak of, just very occasional visitors. And this, other than that, my practice is uncluttered. To sit and observe and watch. And reflection, in my case, is to look back and when I arrived, how was greed? How was hatred? How was delusion? It's hard to determine, but how would I react would be a question I would ask myself and encourage you to ask yourselves when reflecting. How would I react in this particular situation? And think of a real example of a situation you've experienced recently, how you've reacted now to how you might have reacted back in the past. You remember that fond past that we cling to on so happily and think was so marvellous, those sunny summers and those white Christmases. How would you have reacted then before you were practicing the Dharma? Before you'd taken refuge in the Triple Gem, before you were keeping precepts? How would you have reacted then on those sunny, balmy summers and those beautiful white Christmases compared to how you will react now, and also, to some extent, how you can be quite sure and rest assured that you will react if a similar event occurs in the future? Because when you've learned, when you've developed, when you've conditioned the mind, developed wholesome mind states, reduced unwholesome mind states, eroded, even if not eradicated, but weakened greed, weakened hatred, and strengthened your understanding, therefore undermining, weakening delusion. When you've been able to loosen that grip these kilesas, these defilements have over your decision-making process, have on over your reactions, you cannot really, they cannot re-establish that grip. You've seen clearly the nature of anicca, impermanence, dukkha, suffering, and anatta, not self. This cannot be unseen. It's not like learning pi to so many digits or learning even a foreign language. Even if a foreign language becomes absolutely natural, it can be, with time, unused, to a certain extent, forgotten. Even, I'm told, our own natural mother tongue language can be largely forgotten if unused and replaced by another language. But knowledge of impermanence, of unsatisfactoriness and not self, just kept as that, not elaborated upon, not expanded upon. It's not necessary. The Buddha explains them enough in the suttas for our own benefit. Just to know of them, but then more importantly to experience them whilst meditating, whilst practicing, coming to realize them and see them clearly in their practical application through your own interactions within your work life, your family life, your social life. And as us as monks and nuns, whom also can end up in a rut with duties in a monastery, or even thinking, I must get jhana, I must sit here for 12 hours a day just meditating, and get no further than that, than wanting. Why? Because you're wanting. It's desire, the source of this suffering, the cause of suffering. It's about letting go, relaxing, and really enjoying each and every lazy moment, each and every lazy, relaxed moment I have with nothing to do, sitting here meditating, but also not worrying about optional extras that might make life sitting here doing nothing more comfortable. The fan became essential after repairing, or me trying to repair various other fans, but apart from that, I have all I need. I'm content. And now, although I couldn't have predicted that when I arrived here, which was at the end of 2023, however long ago that was. No, it wasn't. It was in October 2023. So however long ago that was. I couldn't have predicted even staying here for a few weeks, let alone this length of time. But I decided after being here for a certain amount of time that it was supportive of this very simple practice and conducive of developing wholesome mind states, reducing unwholesome mind states, allowing me to just practice in accordance with the Noble Eightfold Path without straying outside of those parameters, even on occasions. It doesn't become necessary. There are no other duties or responsibilities to interfere with that development. So now I look and I see, well, I'm a very different person to that person that arrived. Actually, the chitta remains the same, the mind. I've been slowly trying to condition it throughout all of these days and nights as the time has marched relentlessly by. The persona, I haven't broken free of all of the fetters, the ties to samsara, of maybe conceit and anger, or even taming anger a little to disliking or annoyance. You see, greed, hatred and delusion are the root defilements. And I hear on a lot of Dharma talks these days, it seems, people not wanting to use certain words, saying things like, oh, hatred's a bit of a strong word, and delusion delusion is easier. It becomes difficult to understand delusion because you can't see it in yourself by the very nature that you are deluded. But greed and hatred are very visible. You can see greed in yourself, you can see hatred in yourself. So don't soften those defilements. I've even heard the word defilements being not liked as a word or a translation. Well, it is. It's impurities of mind. When I say developing wholesome mind states, eradicating unwholesome or reducing unwholesome mind states, it's greed and hatred we're trying to reduce. If we don't call them what they are, see them as that, and just that, then how do we go about understanding them and eradicating them? Greed is that. And yes, there are very many degrees of greed below that, just liking a little bit too much sugar in your tea, or liking coffee a little bit too much, or a particular incense over another. And then there's hatred in varying degrees from that hatred, just that. I hate this situation, I hate this person, I hate that this has happened to me, to just really not liking something and preferring it to be another way. But what we need to really work on is the root. Without cutting these defilements off at the root, they will still flourish. So if we concentrate on the just little not likings and the little likings and make it too flowery and fluffy, then we won't see the problem in itself. And a lot of the practice in the harsher sense is that. It is sitting for a long time and experiencing pain and seeing the emotion of not liking it, hating it, wanting to get up and do something else, but going through it. But in our everyday lives, you have many more interactions with other people, other situations, and then internally other physical feelings and other mental emotions that each in turn you can see clearly if you dedicate the time, energy, and have the inclination towards Dharma to do so throughout all of your daily activities of body, speech and mind, from the minute you wake up until the minute you go to sleep. And this is sati sampajana. This is mindfulness of everything that's going on. This is developing samasati, right mindfulness, seeing these things as they are, and then recollecting how they will make you feel, how they've made you feel in the past, and how you can avoid that feeling being negative by learning from the experience that it's only happening right now in this present moment. Even pain is only here in the present moment. And the biggest problem with the pain is that you're projecting its continuation into the future, anticipating its continuation into the future, and knowing you cannot bear it for any longer. Even in that time that thought has occurred, you have borne it a moment longer. And as time goes by in meditation, you can see very clearly that you can sit with pain until the end of your meditation session, and you do sit with it, whether it goes away or it doesn't go away. As much as you can't bear it, you've already borne it to now, and another moment will make no more difference. You keep going with it. This is determination. And this is strengthening the mind's capacity, the mind's ability, and the thinking brain's elasticity to be flexible over all situations. And that flexibility, in turn, develops one of the ultimate and salient ingredients or aspects of the factors of enlightenment, and that is equanimity. The ability to be equanimous in all situations, remaining calm, and then act accordingly and wisely, appropriately, within the parameters of the Noble Eightfold Path, in order to either improve or accept, without judgment, negatively or positively, towards that situation. And therefore building more attachment, but cutting away those attachments, those fetters, reducing the likelihood of anger coming as a result of hatred, because anger too is connected with, through delusion, through hatred. Delusion because you're not understanding that just getting angry is going to make the situation worse. Even if it temporarily relieves the situation for yourself, you might think, it only ultimately gives you a bad feeling and making the hatred worse. So I'm reflecting on this wonderful opportunity I have had here and continue to have here to just practice, in how much more clearly I'm seeing the benefits in that refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma and Sangha, as being in exchange for that refuge we think we have, which is just the past, just memory. Now, it's safe to say your memories will always be there, and fondness of a particular person or a time in your life, there is nothing wrong with that. Your photographs, your videos, your journals, or how you remember a situation may bring you great comfort, happiness and enjoyment in the present moment. But knowing that that is just pictures like a movie or a story that you're bringing into the present moment for examination, and that joy and that comfort is coming as a result of that stimulation, which is part of the six senses: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, but it's touching, but it's thinking, the sixth of the sense, this imagination, this memory that's giving you comfort. Not as in the way that you can derive absolute assured comfort and security from something as very simple as the breath. Just breathing in, just breathing out. Sitting in meditation in the present moment, here and now. Leaving all thoughts of the past behind you and not worrying about the future. Our true refuge is here in this present moment. And this is from your own reflections, whether it's once a week or if it can be just before your meditation every evening. You sit and you reflect, how well have I been spending my day? Have I been increasing my tendency towards the defilements of greed, hatred and delusion? Or have I been working towards decreasing my tendency towards the defilements of greed, hatred and delusion? This is the most important question. If you've been doing anything to increase greed, hatred and delusion, then you have not been using your time wisely. But if you've been practicing in order to decrease greed, hatred and delusion, then you've been using your time very wisely, and these visible results, experiential results, can be seen right now in the present moment, not as a memory and not as an imagination of the future, but how you're feeling now. Are you feeling happier now than you were feeling yesterday evening? If you're not, then it isn't what's happened in the interim period. You may have had a terrible day, or you may have had a really good day, but it's how you received that, how you saw it, heard it, smelt it, tasted it, felt it, and very importantly, thought about it. If you thought about it clearly, seeing everything that happened experientially clearly, vipassana, seeing clearly, then you'd know the characteristics within all of those events are there of impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and not within your control. So whether a good day or a bad day, your emotion can remain equanimous, unchanged. And the more we erode that delusion, the more equanimous we become to all the goings on around us. And progressively, each and every day, as we reflect upon this, we can see, and we can see clearly, a stage by stage development. But most appropriately, like looking in a mirror or looking at a photograph of yourself today or yesterday or last week, you don't change. But go back 1 year, go back 5 years, go back 10 years, you can see a lot of change. So take your mind back to before you were practicing, before you took refuge, Tisadana Panchasila in the Triple Gem or the 5 precepts, and how would you have reacted? How would you have felt then by comparison to how you feel now with the same situation? And this is the way to see, measure your progress on the path. And remembering always, we wish to progress happily on this path towards Nibbana. We don't have to be hard on ourselves and struggle, but we also don't have to surround ourselves with fluffy feathers and what is inaccuracies, really, of trying to soften the blow of the inevitable facts of life, of aging, sickness and death. These things happen. But when they happen, if we can respond to those circumstances equanimously, then we don't suffer as much as we would if we react through the root defilements of greed, hatred and delusion. So know the defilements of that, defilements, impurities of our minds. Greed, greediness, and all that's associated with that. That even includes jealousy, for instance, and then hatred, and all the negative sides of that, which includes anger and delusion, which is not ignorance, because it's worse. It's having the knowledge, having the information, but not being able to use it to your own benefit, because we're looking firstly to improve ourselves. This is how we help everyone else. You cannot help anyone else if you neglect helping yourself. So first we begin the practice of our own, and then by that example, hope to help others. So I think on that note and short reflection, I'll leave it there until we review your comments and questions again tomorrow, which will give us considerable more food for thought, I'm sure, matters for discussion, which I hope you continue to enjoy. I find it very useful for my practice, also enjoyable, fulfilling. It's always of great comfort to have your kind words of encouragement and support in that way. And hopefully some of the points I'm able to share back with you, and some of the things that I'm sharing with you and saying, which are only coming from the Dharma and my own experience putting it into practice, are useful to you. And where they are, where it is, please use it and maybe share it with others. Or if it isn't, don't worry, just let it go, but maybe come back another time and see what there is being said on a future occasion, because it's always continually going toward, it's always continually developing. I think, like I might have said yesterday, the questions may seem sometimes repetitive, but again, this is part of that nature of mundane existence. They have to be repetitive. We have to do our daily routines, our jobs. My routine has been the same for over a year, day in, day out. I've had more or less the same to eat each and every day, but I'm grateful for that. I only eat once a day, so I'm always hungry, so it doesn't matter what it is so much. But it keeps me able to practice. And you too, when you have a job that maybe it's not so interesting, maybe it's very routine and you feel like you're in a rut, or you're driving along that country lane through beautiful Devon, you have the ability through this refuge in the Triple Gem and through your own practice to raise yourselves out of that. This is what we call transcendence. You transcend above all of that rut, that routine, mundane existence, to see clearly the beauty of your existence and be able to enjoy each and every moment for what it is, whatever it is you may be having to do externally. So on that note, I shall leave it there. Be happy and stay well. Sukhi Hotu.